There comes a quiet moment in life, so quiet you might almost miss it, when your spirit grows weary of carrying what was never meant for your soul. It is the moment you begin to see clearly, not with your eyes, but with that deep knowing within you, that some people do not come to nurture your light, but to test how long you will dim it for their comfort. And on that day, when your heart finally stands up for itself, something powerful begins to shift. Not in them, but in you. Because the truth is, there is one simple, life-altering choice you can make. A choice so strong, so unwavering, that once you make it, toxic people will no longer find a home in your presence. There is a quiet exhaustion that settles into the bones when you spend too much of your life trying to be understood by those who have already decided not to see you. You shape your words carefully, soften your tone, stretch your patience thin, hoping that if you just explain yourself one more time, they will finally recognize your heart. But the truth stands, steady and unshaken. People who benefit from misunderstanding you will rarely choose clarity, and in that realization, something inside you begins to awaken. You were never meant to audition for acceptance. Your worth was not designed to be negotiated, debated, or proven through endless explanations. It exists, whole and complete, whether it is acknowledged or ignored. And every time you over-explain yourself to those committed to overlooking you, you slowly hand away pieces of your peace. Not because you are weak, but because you have been taught that being understood is the same as being valued. It is not. There comes a moment when you must decide that your voice is not a tool for convincing, but a vessel for truth. You say what you mean, you stand where you stand, and you allow others to receive it as they will, or not at all. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the gentle but firm refusal to shrink yourself just to fit into someone else's limited vision of who you should be. You begin to understand that clarity is a gift, but it is not your responsibility to force someone to accept it. And so you release the urge to over-explain. You let your actions speak in the language of consistency, and your silence speak in the language of self-respect. You no longer chase validation from those who withhold it like a weapon. Instead, you root yourself in a deeper knowing that the right people do not require a performance to recognize your value. They see you, not because you proved yourself, but because they are capable of seeing. When you stop explaining your worth to those who refuse to see it, something remarkable happens. The noise begins to fade, the endless back and forth, the emotional drain, the quiet frustration, it all loosens its grip. You find yourself with more energy, more clarity, more space to simply be. And in that space, your peace grows stronger than your need to be understood. This is the shift that changes everything. Not because others suddenly change, but because you do. You stop knocking on doors that were never meant to open for you. You stop translating your soul into smaller words for smaller minds. And instead, you stand fully, quietly, powerfully in the truth of who you are. And from that place, toxic people lose their hold, not because you fought them harder, but because you finally stopped trying to convince them at all. There is a turning point in every life that does not arrive with noise or celebration, but with a quiet, undeniable truth rising from within. You can no longer abandon yourself to keep others comfortable. It is not a loud rebellion, nor a dramatic declaration. It is a soft, steady decision, the kind that settles deep in your chest and refuses to be ignored. The day you choose yourself is not the day the world changes. It is the day you do. For so long, you may have measured your worth by how much you could give, how much you could tolerate, how much of yourself you could set aside to keep the peace. You learned to bend, to adjust, to make room even when it left you standing on the edges of your own life. But there comes a moment when your spirit grows tired of living as a guest in a place it was meant to own. And in that moment, something sacred begins to rise, a quiet insistence that you, too, deserve your own loyalty. Choosing yourself does not mean you stop caring. It means you start caring in the right direction. It means you no longer pour endlessly into spaces that leave you empty. You begin to recognize that love should not feel like depletion, and connection should not require the erosion of your peace. And so you begin to pull back, not in bitterness, but in wisdom, not in anger, but in understanding. This choice will not always be understood by others. Some will call it selfish because they have grown accustomed to your self-sacrifice. Some will question it because it disrupts the version of you they found convenient. But you are not here to live as someone else's convenience. You are here to live as your fullest, truest self, and that requires a courage that does not ask for permission. When you choose yourself, your boundaries become clearer, your voice becomes steadier, and your presence becomes more grounded. You no longer feel the need to chase, to convince, or to hold on to what does not honor you. You begin to walk differently, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. The kind of certainty that does not need to announce itself, because it is felt in every step you take. And something remarkable begins to unfold. The chaos that once surrounded you starts to lose its power. The voices that once disturbed your peace grow distant, not because they have disappeared, but because you are no longer standing in a place where they can reach you. You have moved inward into a space where your worth is not debated, where your energy is protected, and where your peace is no longer negotiable. The day you choose yourself is the day you stop asking the world to validate what was already true. It is the day you return home to who you have always been. And from that place, toxic people no longer find easy access to you, not because you built walls, but because you finally built a life that does not revolve around their presence. There is a kind of silence that the world has misunderstood for far too long. It is not the silence of fear, nor the silence of defeat, but the silence of a soul that has learned the value of its own voice so deeply that it no longer feels the need to spend it carelessly. You see, not every response deserves to be spoken, and not every provocation deserves your energy. There is power in restraint, in choosing when to speak and when to simply stand still in your truth. For many, silence feels uncomfortable. It feels like losing, like surrendering ground in a battle that demands to be fought. But there comes a wisdom, earned through experience, that teaches you something far greater. That constant reaction is not strength, and endless explanation is not power. True strength is found in the ability to remain unshaken, even when the noise around you tries to pull you into its storm. When you begin to embrace this kind of silence, you are not shrinking, you are rising. You are stepping out of cycles that thrive on your reaction. Toxic people often depend on your engagement, your defense, your emotional response. It feeds the pattern, keeps the connection alive, even if it is unhealthy. But when you choose silence, not as avoidance, but as intention, you disrupt that cycle completely. You remove the very thing that gave their behavior meaning. This silence is not empty. It is full of awareness, of self-respect, of quiet confidence. It is the understanding that your peace is far more valuable than proving a point. You no longer feel the urge to correct every misunderstanding or to challenge every false narrative. You let people think what they will, because you are no longer defined by their perception. You are defined by your own knowing. And yes, there will be moments when this silence is tested. Moments when words rise to your lips, demanding to be spoken, when your heart aches to be understood. But in those moments, you pause, not because you have nothing to say, but because you have learned that not everything needs to be said. You begin to ask yourself not, can I respond, but is it worth my peace? Over time, this choice reshapes your world. The noise begins to lose its hold on you. The need to defend, to argue, to engage, it softens and fades. And in its place, a new kind of strength emerges, a grounded, steady presence that cannot be easily disturbed. People may not always understand it. They may misread your silence as weakness, as indifference. But what they fail to see is that your silence is not an absence, it is a boundary. It is the quiet declaration that you no longer participate in what diminishes you. It is the calm refusal to be drawn into chaos that does not serve your growth, and in that stillness, you reclaim something that was always yours, your sovereignty, not loud, not forceful, but deeply rooted and unshakable. And from that place, toxic people find no doorway into your life, because you have learned that your silence is not surrender, it is power, preserved and protected. There comes a moment when you realize that love, no matter how deep, cannot survive where there is no respect. And respect, true respect, is not built on words alone. It is built on what you allow, what you accept, and what you quietly refuse. This is where boundaries are born, not from anger, not from pride, but from a deep and steady understanding that your life is your responsibility and your peace is not something to be negotiated. For too long, you may have believed that setting boundaries would push people away, that saying no would make you difficult to love, that choosing yourself would come at the cost of connection. So you said yes when your spirit whispered no. You allowed behaviors that unsettled you, hoping that your patience would one day be returned with kindness. But boundaries are not walls meant to isolate you. They are bridges that teach others how to meet you with care. When you begin to set them, something within you shifts. You stop overextending your energy to prove your worth. You stop tolerating what quietly breaks you, and instead you begin to stand in a place of quiet authority over your own life. You understand that every boundary you set is not a rejection of others, but a recognition of yourself. It is you saying, without apology, "This is where I end, and this is where I begin." Not everyone will welcome this change. Some will resist it, question it, even try to cross the lines you have drawn. But that is how you come to see clearly. Those who respect your boundaries are those who respect you, and those who do not were never honoring you to begin with. This truth may feel heavy at first, but it is also freeing, because it removes the illusion that you must endure discomfort to keep people in your life. Boundaries require consistency. They are not just words you speak once. They are choices you make again and again. It is in the moments when it feels easier to give in, to stay silent, to avoid conflict, that your boundaries matter most. Each time you honor them, you reinforce a deeper message within yourself, that you are worthy of respect, not someday, not when others decide, but now. And slowly, your world begins to change. The chaos lessens, the confusion fades. You find yourself surrounded, not by those who demand your energy, but by those who value it. And even when you stand alone, there is a peace in knowing that you have not abandoned yourself to keep others close. Because in the end, boundaries are not about controlling how others behave. They are about deciding what you will allow in your space, in your mind, and in your heart. They are the quiet, unwavering language of self-respect. And once you learn to speak it fluently, toxic people will no longer find comfort in your presence, not because you forced them out, but because you finally stopped making room for what does not honor you. There is a truth that often arrives softly, almost unnoticed at first, yet it carries the weight of transformation within it. You teach people how to treat you, not through grand speeches, not through perfect explanations, but through the quiet consistency of what you accept and what you walk away from. Every interaction becomes a lesson you are either reinforcing or rewriting. And whether you realize it or not, your life is always speaking on your behalf. In the beginning, many of us teach without awareness. We accept what unsettles us. We laugh off what hurts. We stay silent where we should have spoken. And in doing so, we send a message, not only to others, but to ourselves, that our discomfort is negotiable. That message becomes familiar, and familiarity slowly turns into pattern. People do not always test your boundaries with malice. Sometimes they simply follow the instructions your silence has given them. But there comes a moment when awareness breaks through. A moment when you pause and begin to see that what surrounds you is not just happening to you, it is responding to you. And in that realization, something powerful awakens. You begin to understand that change does not require force, it requires decision, one clear, intentional decision at a time. You do not need to announce a revolution in your life. You only need to change your response, to stop laughing at what hurts, to stop explaining away what feels wrong, to stop staying where your spirit quietly leaves long before your body does. These small decisions, repeated with consistency, begin to reshape the entire language of your life. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. People who were used to your silence may resist your voice. Those who benefited from your flexibility may question your firmness. But this is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that the lesson is finally changing. You are no longer teaching people that your boundaries are optional. You are teaching them that you are present in your own life now. And with time, something remarkable happens. The same energy you once spent on over-explaining, over-giving, and overextending begins to return to you. You begin to feel lighter, clearer, more anchored in yourself. You realize that respect is not something you demand, it is something you demonstrate through what you consistently allow. You also begin to notice that the people meant for your life do not struggle with your boundaries. They do not require constant correction or emotional negotiation. They meet you where you stand without confusion, and that clarity becomes its own form of peace. Because in the end, teaching people how to treat you is not about controlling others. It is about aligning your actions with your worth. It is about choosing, again and again, not to abandon yourself for the comfort of being accepted. And once that choice becomes your standard, you no longer need to fight for respect. You simply live in a way that makes disrespect impossible to sustain around you. There is a quiet wisdom that comes only after you have survived enough storms to recognize that not every wind is worth standing against. At first, life teaches you to defend yourself in every direction. You feel as though peace must be protected through constant response, that every misunderstanding must be corrected, every insult answered, every challenge met with equal force. But over time, something within you begins to soften, not into weakness, but into discernment. You start to see that many of the battles you once entered were never truly yours to fight. They were invitations wrapped in emotion, distractions disguised as urgency, moments designed to pull you away from yourself. And you stepped into them not because they mattered, but because you cared, because you wanted to be understood, because you believed your energy could change what was never willing to change. But there is a deeper strength that begins to rise when you realize that your energy is not infinite. Every argument you enter, every reaction you give, every emotional fire you feed, it all takes something from you. And what it takes is not always visible in the moment. Sometimes it is your clarity. Sometimes it is your peace. Sometimes it is your ability to remain grounded in who you are. There comes a point when you begin to ask a different kind of question. Not, can I respond, but should I? Not, am I right? But is this worth the cost of my calm? And in that shift, your entire way of living begins to change. You no longer feel the need to meet every challenge with force. You no longer confuse silence with surrender or walking away with defeat. Instead, you begin to recognize that restraint is its own form of mastery. Not every battle deserves your energy, because not every battle leads anywhere worthy of your presence. Some are circular, designed to drain you rather than resolve anything. Some are rooted in misunderstanding that no amount of explanation can untangle. And some exist only because your reaction gives them life. When you stop feeding them, they dissolve on their own. And so you begin to choose differently. You choose peace over proving. You choose clarity over chaos. You choose yourself over situations that pull you further away from your center. This is not avoidance, it is alignment. It is the understanding that your life becomes smaller when you fight everything, but it becomes deeper when you choose carefully. There is a quiet confidence that comes with this choice. You no longer feel the need to justify your absence from every argument. You no longer feel responsible for fixing every misunderstanding. You begin to trust that what is meant for your peace will not require destruction to maintain, and what constantly disturbs you may not deserve your participation at all. And slowly, your world changes shape. The noise becomes less appealing. The urgency of every conflict fades. You find yourself standing in spaces that feel lighter, clearer, more intentional. Not because conflict has disappeared, but because you have learned where not to stand. In the end, the greatest strength is not in how many battles you fight, but in how many you wisely refuse. Because every battle you walk away from is not a loss, it is a return to your peace, your clarity, and the quiet understanding that your energy was never meant to be spent on everything that demands it. There is a moment in life when you finally understand that walking away is not the ending of something good, but the beginning of something honest. For so long, you may have been taught, directly or quietly, that leaving means failure, that distance means defeat, that staying is the only proof of loyalty. So you remain longer than your peace allows, longer than your heart agrees with, longer than your spirit can comfortably carry. You call it patience, you call it love, you call it endurance. But deep down, there is a part of you that knows you are slowly abandoning yourself in the process. Walking away begins as a whisper before it becomes a decision. At first it feels like guilt, then it feels like fear, and finally, if you listen closely enough, it begins to feel like relief. That relief is not accidental. It is truth finally being acknowledged. Because what you are walking away from is not always a person or a place or a situation. Often, you are walking away from patterns that diminish you, from dynamics that keep you small, from cycles that ask you to forget your own worth in order to maintain their comfort. And yet, the world does not always understand this kind of departure. Some will call it weakness because they cannot see the strength it takes to leave what is familiar. Some will call it coldness because they have grown accustomed to your warmth, regardless of whether it was returned. But walking away is not an act of coldness. It is an act of clarity. It is the moment you stop confusing endurance with love. There is a quiet power in choosing distance over distortion. When you stay in places where you are constantly misunderstood, you begin to lose the shape of your own truth. You start adjusting your voice, shrinking your needs, negotiating your boundaries just to keep something intact that was already breaking you. Walking away interrupts that erosion. It says, without noise or drama, that your presence is not a place where self-abandonment is required. And something remarkable happens when you honor that decision. The noise that once filled your mind begins to settle. The emotional weight you thought was permanent begins to lift. You realize that what you feared would break you was actually what was keeping you stuck. And in stepping away, you are not losing connection. You are restoring connection to yourself. There is a dignity in distance that cannot be explained to those who have never needed to leave to survive themselves. It is not about proving a point or winning an argument. It is about choosing wholeness over familiarity. It is about recognizing that not every door deserves to remain open, and not every connection deserves continuous access to you. And as time passes, you begin to see clearly that what truly belongs to you does not require chasing. It does not require pleading or shrinking or constantly proving your worth. It meets you with ease. It respects your space. It understands your silence without demanding explanation. Everything else simply reveals itself as something you were never meant to hold on to forever. So you walk away, not in anger, not in defeat, but in quiet strength. And in that movement, something sacred is reclaimed. Your energy returns to you. Your voice becomes yours again. Your peace stops being negotiable. And you realize finally that walking away was never about loss. It was always about returning to yourself. There comes a point in life when you begin to understand that peace is not something you stumble upon by chance, nor something others are responsible for maintaining on your behalf. It is something you build, something you guard, something you choose again and again in moments where chaos would be easier, louder, and far more familiar. And in that understanding, peace stops being a feeling and becomes a decision, one that requires courage every single time you make it. At first, peace feels fragile. It can be disrupted so easily by words, by presence, by memory, by people who carry unresolved storms of their own. You may find yourself believing that if you just try harder, explain better, or give more of yourself, you can maintain it even in environments that were never designed to support it. But peace that depends on constant adjustment is not peace at all. It is endurance disguised as calm. There is a deeper kind of peace that begins to form when you finally accept that not every space deserves access to your emotional world. You start noticing what unsettles you, even in subtle ways. A tone that feels dismissive, a pattern that feels draining, a presence that leaves you heavier instead of lighter. And instead of explaining it away, instead of minimizing it, you begin to trust what you feel without needing external validation. This is where protection begins. Not through walls of fear, but through clarity of awareness. You no longer wait until damage is visible before you respond. You begin to act at the first sign of erosion. You step back when something disturbs your inner balance, not because you are avoiding life, but because you are choosing to live it without constant internal disruption. Protecting your peace is not always understood by others. Some will interpret your distance as rejection, your boundaries as coldness, your silence as indifference. But what they often fail to see is that you are not withdrawing from life. You are withdrawing from what continuously takes life from you. And that distinction is everything. There is strength in refusing to remain in environments where you must repeatedly abandon yourself just to keep things stable. There is wisdom in recognizing that some conversations are not meant to be continued, some patterns are not meant to be fixed by your effort alone, and some energies are not meant to coexist with your well-being. The moment you accept this, you stop negotiating with your own discomfort. And slowly, your life begins to reflect this choice. The noise that once followed you begins to fade. The urgency to explain yourself begins to dissolve. You find yourself no longer reacting to everything around you, but responding only to what aligns with your inner stillness. And in that space, something powerful emerges. A steadiness that cannot be easily shaken. Peace, once protected, becomes something sacred, not because the world becomes perfect, but because you become intentional. You begin to understand that your energy is not an endless resource to be spent on everything that demands it. It is something precious, something finite, something worthy of care. And so you guard it, not with aggression, not with resistance, but with quiet certainty. You choose carefully where you stand, who you engage with, what you allow into your emotional space. And in doing so, you discover a truth that changes everything. A peaceful life is not created by controlling the world around you, but by refusing to let the world control what lives within you. There is a quiet kind of freedom that arrives the moment you accept a truth many people spend their entire lives resisting. You are not required to be understood by everyone who forms an opinion about you. For so long, you may have believed that clarity would bring peace, that if you just explained yourself well enough, carefully enough, patiently enough, others would finally see your intention. But life has a way of revealing that not every misunderstanding is a puzzle waiting to be solved. Some are simply choices people make about you, regardless of how clearly you speak. At first, being misunderstood feels personal. It feels like something you must correct, something you must repair. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for better words, softer tones, different angles. You try to bridge gaps that were never created by confusion alone, but sometimes by assumption, projection, or emotional distance. And in that effort, you begin to notice something subtle but exhausting. You are spending more energy defending your truth than living it. There comes a turning point when you realize that constant explanation does not always lead to understanding. In fact, it often deepens the cycle of exhaustion. You begin to see that people who are determined to misunderstand you will always find a way to do so, no matter how carefully you present yourself. And this is not a reflection of your inadequacy, it is a reflection of their perception, their limits, their willingness or unwillingness to see you fully. And so, something within you begins to soften in a different direction. You stop treating every misunderstanding as a problem you must solve. You stop rushing to fill every silence with justification. You begin to understand that your truth does not become more real when it is repeatedly defended. It simply is. It exists beyond approval, beyond interpretation, beyond acceptance. Letting others misunderstand you is not indifference, it is maturity. It is the quiet decision to stop outsourcing your peace to the opinions of people who were never invested in understanding you in the first place. You begin to realize that clarity is something you offer, not something you beg for. And when it is not received, you do not diminish yourself to make it easier for others to digest. There is a deep strength in this release. Because when you stop over-explaining, you begin to reclaim something essential, your energy, your presence, your focus. You no longer scatter yourself across every misunderstanding. You no longer bend your truth into smaller, more acceptable shapes just to be perceived differently. You stand where you are, grounded and steady, allowing your life to speak where your words are no longer needed. And in time, something powerful becomes clear. The people who are meant to understand you will not require constant decoding. They will not need endless justification or emotional labor to see your heart. They will recognize you in the quiet consistency of who you are. And those who choose not to see you clearly were never going to be reached by explanation anyway. So you let them misunderstand you, not because you do not care, but because you finally understand the cost of caring too much about being seen correctly by everyone. You owe no one a reduced version of your truth. You owe no one the exhaustion of endless explanation. And in that realization, you return to something far more valuable than being understood. You return to yourself.